On this episode of China Unscripted, what so many people are getting wrong about TikTok and how the Chinese Communist Party is weaponizing it. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnesta.
Today we're going to talk about TikTok. So, there's a lot of misinformation going on about what this TikTok bill ban is. Fortunately, thanks to the internet, I found out the truth. You see, what's going on is it's a Jewish conspiracy because TikTok was the only source for real information about Israel. Also, China Uncensored is paid by the Jews, apparently. And that's what's happening.
I think that Chris has been spending too much time arguing with people on Instagram. Is what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I handle the social media of all the shows, so you guys don't have to deal with this. But
no,
yeah.
I just watched the car wreck from a distance.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I am kind of stunned by the anti-Semitism. But yeah, so that's one theory.
Because that's definitely been getting worse on the internet.
It has been, but it's just more pervasive than I thought.
In fact, I got a little nervous as even we're talking about this because I was like, is this now going to be like
Is
somehow
YouTube going to be
blacklist this? Because
well, there was that one time I did an episode about anti-Semitism in China, and YouTube demonetized and age-restricted the episode because of anti-Semitism.
So you were discussing the problem of anti-Semitism, and YouTube was like, okay, this is anti-Semitic?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
Okay,
this is the problem with their artificial intelligence. It's not very intelligent.
Dang right.
It really doesn't get your sarcasm. It just doesn't get you, Chris. Not the way that we do.
Just reporting facts. But yes, I now know that a lot of people are very confused about this TikTok bill, and there are just crazy things going around on the internet. So I thought today we could maybe discuss some of the main points of misinformation.
Yeah, and one of the things, just to clarify, is that we actually read the bill. And it's
Yes,
not very
it's
long.
not long.
It's a few pages.
Yeah, we'll put it, and that's one thing. Like Thomas Massey, who's like against the bill, like did this speech where it's like, and the bill is so long.
He said that.
He did.
But maybe
it's really short for a bill.
Yeah, and he was also saying like basically the TikTok's not a threat.
Those are two different things. The TikTok not being a threat and the bill being too long. Both of those are lies, but they're different lies.
Yeah.
Well, but so here's the thing. It's not required for members of the public to read the TikTok bill, but it is required for members of Congress. Well, that's not actually required. It is a very good idea for members of Congress to read the text of the bill that they're going to vote on.
Well,
I mean, I feel like they probably almost never do. They have staff for that, but you know.
Well, and this is the weird thing. Like a lot of people have been like saying to me, like, "Oh yeah, the bill it could ban anyone who just like questions elections," and I'm like, it doesn't actually say elections anywhere in the bill. And like this person was like, well, like I showed him the bill, and he was like, well, the thing I saw said it did. It's like what you saw was misinformation.
Actually, is I saw that person who was like, because you kept asking people to show you the parts of the bill.
I'm willing to think it's like, so I think the bill is great. I am willing to accept that it's not great if somebody can make an actual argument.
Because I feel like what happened with the Restrict Act is people did bring up things that were like, oh, maybe this is not so great. And you could actually see some of their arguments. But this bill is very short. It's very targeted. It doesn't give like overarching powers to the U.S. government.
It's actually a really good example of how checks and balances work in the U.S. legal system.
And it was what was required to have a bipartisan bill.
And I think the interesting thing is that like when you were like saying to one of these people like read the bill, and then someone else chimed in. I think it was like Raheem Kazem, who's like he's like a conservative political commentator, and he actually chimed in the comments, going like, this is what it says in the bill. And then the person was like, oh, well, this isn't, they must have changed the bill. Like, this isn't the version that I and many other thousands of people read a few days ago. Like, it's just kind of like, okay.
Well, but you do want to look at the version that was passed by the House.
Yeah, but I don't actually think it changed.
Not substantially.
Not substantially. Like, I think it's just that people have this issue where they don't necessarily remember facts. I think people remember impressions.
I mean, emotions.
Yeah, emotions. But so like you may have somehow read something. Maybe it wasn't the original bill. Maybe it was somebody you like a commentator that you listen to, or some other person on the internet who shares your political beliefs or whatever, and then become convinced that this is like a terrible bill, and then you go around being like, this is a terrible bill, but then when you were like, can you show me where it's terrible, like people just could not come up with the answer to that.
And so some people respond to that, well, I must be an authoritarian bootlicker who has sold out or something.
Or like the China Uncensored is obviously propaganda. It's that one cartoon I showed you that was like two stick figures, and one was like A, and the other stick figure was thinking A. The other one person was like B.
Yeah.
The other person was like, yeah, B. The other person was C, and then the other person was like D. This person's terrible. I hate everything they said. Like there's one thing they disagree on.
It is a weird thing that I've like noticed for a long time now. I've lost a lot of friends actually because of it. But like you can be like in sync, and if there's one thing you disagree on, then that must mean you are actually an enemy.
Throw the whole person out.
Throw the whole person out is wild. So that's why I'm open to somebody actually making a good argument for why this bill is bad. I have just not seen it.
I think that there are a lot of people making arguments based on not what the bill says or anything like that, but like the general idea that it's bad to give the U.S. government more power, or because of things like the Patriot Act, or okay, well, maybe this bill doesn't, but then they could, if this bill passes, then they could pass future bills that are worse.
So what I've seen is like, I mean, this whole process has shown how badly people are educated about civics in the United States. Number one, when TikTok got a bunch of Americans to call their congressmen to complain about the bill, and a lot of them were saying like, "What's a congressman?"
Well, they TikTok pushed this. We'll put it on screen. This
it was a push notification.
Like push notification, and you could just enter your zip code, and it'll show you your local congressperson.
And then you could just
click to call.
Yeah.
So it's so easy, and you just do it without even thinking about it, and then suddenly you're on the phone with a congressional staffer, and you're like, wait, what am I calling about?
But no, like the actual like quote from a staffer was that we had lots of people calling and asking what a congressman was.
Yes.
So not great civics education, but I think also the issue is because there is a general mistrust of the government and sort of like legal, like contracts, laws, it's kind of a black box to a lot of people.
Sure.
So they don't know how it works. So it's like a law is a Trojan horse where it's like no matter what the bill says, somewhere in there's like the one line that's what it's really about and makes the rest of it not matter.
Well,
and only if you're really smart can you figure out what's really going on. And so a lot of people in the bill point to the part where it says, I forget the exact language, but like the president determines, well, also like the president determines if it's a national security threat. Mm-hmm. And so some people think that means, oh, yeah, sure, here at the beginning it says it only applies to China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. But because of that, it means the president can declare anything he wants a national security threat and ban it. Figured it out.
Well, I do have to say that it's not clear in the bill that it only applies to China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran, because the definition is a foreign adversary country is defined according to like this like U.S. code or like already
and then if
law.
You go to that,
so you have to go like you have to then Google the number of this U.S. law then to see like the definition of a foreign adversary. So I can see how people would maybe gloss over that part. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it is true that you cannot just like take a piece and out of context. I also saw a lot of people highlighting this part where it was just defining what like an app or a website or like that anything that's controlled by this foreign adversary, including websites, apps, blah, blah, blah. And then they were just highlighting the part that said website, like, oh, any website is now, in danger.
It's going to be used to shut down X and go after Elon Musk.
Well, I just want to make a couple points. One is that people who fear that there could just be one terrible line in there, I think there's some legitimacy to that fear, because there are many cases in which that can happen. I mean, we saw really significant overreach with the Patriot Act, right? And what ultimately happened was just this mass surveillance and tracking system set up by the NSA and so on, sort of flowing from that. So there are little legitimate concerns. Just I don't think that applies to this specific bill. And number two was really important, and I totally forgot what it was going to be. So I'm going to stop there.
Okay.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I think it's definitely worth us kind of like delving into what's actually in the bill. Again, we're going to put a link down below. I encourage you to read it because it is short. But so number one, it's not a TikTok ban. It's not a ban on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
So what the bill actually does is it requires ByteDance, which is the parent company of TikTok, to divest, that is, sell it off.
Well, technically, it doesn't even say that. It begins with if this is an application that is controlled, and there's a big section about like describing what control means, and it's actually pretty stringent. It's not just like, AOC accuses Musk of being pro-Russia, X gets shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's true.
Right.
And then so there's certain requirements that have to be done, and if the requirements are met, I think the president has to like send a report to Congress.
Yeah. Well, even before then, like if it is controlled by, and like we said, like currently it only applies to China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. So, yes, they could add more foreign adversaries as time goes on because that makes sense. Someday Canada is going to reveal its true colors.
Then they have to go back and change U.S. law to make Canada a foreign adversary.
Exactly.
Did you know that Canada has red on its flag? And it has
so does the
50% more red than the American flag.
The real problem on Canada's flag is the maple leaf. But let's go back to Chris's point.
Yes. So yeah, there is no way that like, yes, what counts as a foreign adversary can be expanded. It can never be used to describe Elon Musk. It cannot be North Korea, Iran, China, and Elon Musk.
I mean, Congress would have to vote that into law, essentially.
Yes.
That Elon Musk is now officially a foreign adversary of the U.S.
And also people forget like the Supreme Court is a thing that can rule things unconstitutional.
Right. Well, and actually that's why the original version of this was blocked in courts, which is that in 2020, then President Trump tried to issue an executive order that would do a very similar thing, like force ByteDance to divest, essentially, in TikTok. And that got blocked by the courts. They filed those TikTok and WeChat, which it is also applied to, had filed an injunction to stop that and were successful, claiming, I think falsely, that it was a free speech issue. But it was also a little easier to block kind of anything that involved a Trump executive order.
I mean, because it wasn't clear. Essentially, it was the preliminary injunction. So the court was just saying, this is blocked until there's more, like this has time to go through the court system and see if this is legal, what the executive order is ordering.
But now we were like getting into November of 2020 and...
Well, then after the Biden administration came in, they eventually repealed that executive order.
Yeah, they tossed it.
Yeah. I mean, it was also probably... Like that executive order gave TikTok like 45 days or something like that, like 90. It was just like very like
it was shorter.
short, very
I think
short
this one's
time.
165.
Yeah, so like 6 months,
something
almost
like that.
6 months to divest.
Right,
But,
and also it's much better to have laws passed by Congress than quasi laws that are just through presidential executive orders,
because they can be repealed by the next guy, which is what happened.
Right. Once a law is passed, it's much harder to repeal. I mean, it does happen.
Yeah,
obviously, but
yeah. But so back to the bill. If something is controlled, and there's a big thing about that, by a foreign adversary, which is currently North Korea, China, Iran, Russia, and then on top of that, it has to be a demonstrable national security threat.
Yeah.
So the way that's determined is that the president has to make that claim, give a report to the public and to Congress, and then there's this whole thing about that decision, like they have to actually agree. So many steps in this where anything can, like, a wrench can be thrown in. Mm-hmm. It's not just like snap your finger, something's banned. Then after that, it still doesn't ban it. Then it just means that foreign adversary has to sell off control of the app.
Yes, or if they don't sell off control, then it will be blocked in like U.S. app stores.
And it
stuff
doesn't
like
say anything about like, oh, if you're an American and you somehow access TikTok after it's been banned because of this, you're going to go to jail.
Is that something people have been saying too?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. You've
Like-
really gone much deeper into the rabbit hole on this. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's being framed like this, massive government overreach that's going to like target just, innocent Americans. And this is by people who like it's amazing. People are like, yeah, TikTok is bad, but the US government is worse. And like the end result is like what these people are essentially arguing is like they don't want the US government to exist.
Well, I don't know if they don't want it to exist.
Well, practically speaking, when they're saying like, oh yeah, we can't give the government power because it'll overreach. And that sounds reasonable, but like if you're blocking like any kind of bill that does anything because the government might somehow misuse it because you don't really understand how the law works, then you're basically saying the U.S. government cannot do anything.
Fundamentally, you don't trust the U.S. government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is reasonable.
There are lots of reasons to distrust the U.S. government or specific things the U.S. government has done, for sure. But what's the alternative? Allowing an app controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, which no matter how many horrible things the U.S. government has done, and there are many, it's not on the scale of what the Chinese Communist Party is. Like the Communist Party is currently killing ethnic minorities, harvesting their organs, putting them in slave labor camps, like on top of a bunch of other things.
I don't think they are, Matt, because, I didn't see that on TikTok.
Oh,
that's right.
You know what?
Well,
You're right.
we will have to get into some of the things about TikTok in a minute.
Because I was talking to a friend of mine and explaining to her why TikTok was dangerous. And then she was I explained to her how they will log your keystrokes if you, like, say you're in TikTok and you click on a link and it opens up a browser inside TikTok. You will, it opens up Safari or Chrome, whatever you use, but you accessed it through the TikTok app. They will record everything you type in, once you're on their app. So, anything you search for, anything, they have all that data. And she was horrified by this. But she had no idea.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people don't understand exactly what TikTok's doing.
Absolutely. And I think we definitely need to get into that because somebody even said to me, well, TikTok doesn't censor content.
Who said that to you?
Somebody who follows the show.
Okay.
So we've established that this is not a ban in what the bill does. So now let's talk about why TikTok is actually dangerous.
Well, almost, because I just want to point out why this divestment idea is good, because the Chinese Communist Party is trying to frame this as, oh, this is a free speech issue, which is so ironic that the Chinese Communist Party in its state-run media is criticizing the U.S. that this is a free speech thing. It's not a free speech thing. If ByteDance divests from TikTok, people get to still have TikTok.
And
we can still have Tide Pod Challenge.
You can kind of argue that would actually protect free speech from the Chinese Communist Party. If TikTok was no longer subject to the control of ByteDance, which is controlled very directly by the Chinese Communist Party, and we can talk about why ByteDance is directly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party, then you're actually protecting free speech. But I think TikTok is very much pushing the idea of this is a ban, this is a free speech issue. They're actually using a lot of talking points. I watched a TikTok from the CEO of TikTok where he was saying oh, this is why, we need to protect TikTok. And he actually used a lot of talking points that I think are very Republican coded in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually would really hurt a lot of small businesses in the U.S. that rely on TikTok, to help bring people to their business. And we would, this would 300,000 Americans would lose their jobs if TikTok was banned. All of these things that are kind of, I thought it was interesting, the talking points that he was using, basically. But the free speech was a big one.
Well, I remember you were making the point, I don't know if you want to get into this now, but how the Chinese Communist Party, against the left, uses the idea of U.S. hegemony, colonialism, all of that, to drive a wedge. And then against the right, it's using this fear of, the U.S. government overreach.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important. Do we want to talk about that now?
Up to you. Maybe it is worth establishing why TikTok TikTok is not the same as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I mean, this is the thing you see. Well, I've seen a lot online. People saying like, "Oh, only American spyware is allowed."
Yeah.
Well,
This
there's a
false
lot of reasons
equivalency.
why other social media are bad in different ways and have their
Yeah,
problems.
this is not like a defense of Facebook, right? Like we're not here saying Facebook is good,
I hate Facebook.
but we are here saying that TikTok is really bad.
Really,
And this
much
is why.
worse.
And there, like, we shouldn't be like, oh, well, like, there's not like an equivalency between TikTok and Instagram. It's not the same for many reasons.
It's best understood as a weapon designed by the Chinese Communist Party to undermine the United States.
Yeah, and I think maybe it didn't start off that way, but it's become that.
Yeah.
100%. But I want to actually, when we're talking about divestment and why, it's interesting that TikTok is making such a fuss about divestment, and because the CEO was interviewed by, I forget which reporter, who was asking him like, well, I mean, the bill doesn't say it's banned, it says it has to be divested, and then he starts being like, well, it's impossible to divest, like, in the time frame, like he starts kind of make some excuse, but then he essentially, like, the line from TikTok is that they cannot divest, but I don't think they can say the real reason why they cannot divest.
What do you
What's the
think,
real
Shelley, is
reason?
the real reason?
Well, I think, actually, Desmond Shum had an interesting tweet about this. We had him on the show a couple years ago. He's he had for many years done business with like CCP leadership. And then his ex-wife was kidnapped by the CCP leadership and he kind of became a dissident. But he had this tweet where he said, if I were a shareholder of TikTok, I would say a divestiture would be great. The ongoing geopolitical situation sheds such uncertainty that TikTok could not have a capital realization event IPO without divestiture. So basically, like if you're invested in TikTok, this is actually good because this is a way to actually make money.
Right.
Versus like if things keep deteriorating the way they are between China and the US, TikTok is basically going the way of Huawei, right?
Yeah.
Like being banned, it's been banned by the EU on government devices. It's been banned by the US on government devices.
It's been banned by the entire country of India.
Yes.
That one
Yeah.
is a ban.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so like it's going to where like essentially like more and more places are going to try to like restrict TikTok. So that definitely lowers the value, right? So you're thinking if you could make money off of this actually might be the best idea. And it doesn't necessarily need to be bought by Facebook, or that's another argument I've seen where people are like, oh, well, we would just be making
A
other
monopoly.
social media companies more powerful, right? But back in 2020, when Trump was talking about the TikTok ban, TikTok had actually agreed to do some kind of sale where ByteDance would spin off TikTok into a independent company, and then Oracle would take a minority stake in it. So it wasn't being bought by like another giant social media company. And even now, what Rumble says they're interested.
Rumble says they're interested.
Steve Mnuchin is
I
putting
mean-
together a group of investors.
So can I just say for Oracle, because remember how Oracle allegedly, this hasn't been proven in court, allegedly helped the Chinese Communist Party build their firewall censorship system? That was Cisco. Oracle provided servers that helped with their firewall.
Mhm.
And their CEO was not necessarily the most ethical person. So I mean, you have to be careful about who you sell it to. I mean, Mnuchin, former Treasury Secretary. I mean, he was one of the executive producers of the first Wonder Woman movie, which was pretty good.
That's right.
So
Isn't he also? No, it's not Mnuchin who's behind Truth Social.
No.
That was somebody else.
But I think it's interesting that the idea is also presented that like, okay, well, you would just be making Facebook a huge monopoly but like, we're not talking about necessarily TikTok doesn't exist. And I think that's what the TikTok wants the conversation to be about banning.
Well, and you were making the point like why won't they divest from TikTok? And it's because the Chinese Communist Party won't allow it. And I think Christopher Balding made some good points. So like there are three reasons why China would not allow it. One, China wants to burn it down to make a point. B, the intel is too valuable and they just want to hold on to TikTok no matter what. Or they don't want U.S. coders to look inside what makes TikTok tick.
I mean, I think that's quite likely that they don't want to expose like the algorithm or just like
all the things it was doing.
Yes, all the weird spying things that it was doing.
Well,
and we can
think
talk
about the
that
Twitter
too.
files, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine like the TikTok files come out and then you see just how much the Chinese Communist Party directly was giving instructions.
And I think this is now a perfect segue into like what we already know.
Oh, yes.
You want to say something?
I do want to say something, but I think another
reason... So into
reason...
why what we know about TikTok is... All right, go ahead, Sean.
I do think that another reason, I think Balding's points are all really important, but I think another reason is that the CCP, by not letting ByteDance divest from TikTok, is showing how much control they already have over TikTok.
Yeah.
And also, the reason is that they... like media warfare, right? Like public information warfare, no, you could call it social media warfare in this case, is really important to the CCP staying in power. Yeah. So,
and that's a point, like everyone who's saying, oh, TikTok really isn't that dangerous, they just don't understand that this is information warfare.
Yes. So they want TikTok because this is the first global Chinese app of influence.
Yep.
Yeah. Like you have WeChat, but that's mostly like restricted to like the Chinese diaspora. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people use it all around the world, but they're all Mandarin speaking Chinese people. So TikTok is used by, 170 million people in the US, as they keep saying.
Yep.
So like that is quite a powerful for the CCP, and they don't want to lose that.
And considering that they were able to activate a bunch of them to call Congress.
Yeah.
Like imagine that power that China has over Americans.
Right. And they got a bunch of people, I mean, a huge amount of people to take a specific action. And it was based specifically on lies that they pushed out to people, right? The lie that it was a ban, the lie that it was a free speech issue. I think there's another lie in there as well.
Government overreach.
I think that it is interesting that apparently this was when it was still in committee. So, apparently, according to reporting from Wall Street Journal, that actually caused a lot of Congress people to get really worried and vote for the divestment bill because it made them realize, oh, actually, they do have a lot of power. Yeah. Yeah. So it kind of backfired in a certain way.
Sweet.
I mean, I'm not saying, I once interned at a congressional office, so I think that calling your congressman is the right that people have. And their office is there and people there to pick up the phones to actually so their constituents can, say what they want the congressperson to focus on. And that's totally fine. There's no problem with that. But I think the way that this was handled by TikTok showed the Congress people like how TikTok could be influential.
Yeah. Well, I mean, very, very big picture. The Chinese Communist Party is evil. It uses rape as a form of torture. It harvests organs from people. So the CCP is bad. It's not just, again, it's not a moral equivalency between the U.S. government.
Yes.
Taking care of that.
Yes. The CCP is a very particular type of authoritarian Marxist-Leninist system that seeks control and hegemony over the world, even though they will not say that.
This is probably preaching to the choir, but it needs to be said.
Right. And then so the next step is ByteDance, right, which is a private company in theory, but like all private companies in China, it is controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. There's a CCP committee. You can see from this photo that like the staff in ByteDance understand that they're under the control of the Communist Party.
Well, I think even outside of that, like one of the biggest shareholders, I think, is like a state-controlled company, another state-controlled company.
So there's something called a golden share, which is essentially ByteDance, like a lot of other Chinese tech companies, had to give a 1% stake to a group of like state-run companies, including the Cyberspace Administration of China, which is like essentially like the government agency that censors the internet in China. Yeah. So the Chinese government directly owns a 1% stake, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's called a golden share because it allows them to appoint one of the 3 board of directors for ByteDance.
1 of 3, okay.
1 out of 3. So there is directly somebody appointed by the CCP on ByteDance's board. So like they're in control at the very top, right? And then there's what Matt was talking about, which is like companies of a certain size in China. What is it, 50 employees? Like
It's 50, I
50
think.
employees have to have Communist Party branches in their companies, right? So
and there's also, what is the consequence for a company that refuses to abide by an order given by the CCP?
I mean, you cannot refuse, right?
Well, I mean, like think about when Apple refused to unlock the phone of someone who committed like a terrorism related like shooting or bombing, right? This was years ago when Apple refused to do that.
Yeah, I don't remember what the crime was, but I do remember Apple refusing.
So Apple basically said, we're going to stand up to the US government. And the consequence is that the government was mad, and then eventually the NSA like figured out how to unlock the phone anyway after like a couple months. But basically Apple stood up publicly to the US government. That happens all the time in the US. Companies push back against the government. In China, companies do not push back against the government, which is controlled by the party. That they have to do what the party says, or the consequence is they get shut down, and the individual leadership can also go to jail.
Well, we saw what happened with Jack Ma, where he like did some minor criticism about government policies and disappeared for months.
No, he was totally fine. Very happy.
Totally
just relaxing.
Fine. Well, so specifically, this did happen to Zhang Yimin, the guy who founded
ByteDance.
ByteDance. There was like some CCTV report, criticizing like specifically like the news section of ByteDance.
Yeah, it was this app called
Toutiao,
which is like a news aggregator app. But they had this other, like, I don't know if it was a separate app that was called like Neihan Duanzi, which is like, it was kind of a funny app where people could post like jokes and memes and things, but it all had to do with like current event stuff. So then the CCP didn't like that, and they criticized it for not being, like having the wrong like thought, like not being guided.
Incorrect.
Yeah, like not being guided by the morals.
It went against
like,
socialist core values.
Yes, exactly, of the new era.
Well, so yeah, the Zhang Yimin, the founder of ByteDance, he had to make this public apology. And we can provide a link for that as well because it's out there. But yeah, he was talking about how like, oh, he's going to really be guided by socialist core values.
I mean, he basically used a bunch of like these words that related to like Xi Jinping's like whole like new era stuff, and it was definitely essentially one of those political self-criticism things, right? Where he had to come out and like apologize to the CCP so that they wouldn't shut ByteDance down.
Yeah. So
and they also closed that app, like. They got rid of that entire thing that was making them upset.
Yeah, so absolutely, I think we've established Chinese Communist Party is bad. They have a lot of control over ByteDance. Now let's make the connection to TikTok, and like let's look at some of the things TikTok has done.
But so TikTok is wholly owned by ByteDance.
Yes, it is not a separate company,
right? And ByteDance owns TikTok, and also Douyin is it's basically similar to TikTok, except it's the one that's available in China.
There's a weird thing where some people think that TikTok is banned in China.
Yeah.
But like, it just is that there is a domestic version of TikTok, which is called Douyin.
And it's basically the same as TikTok, except that the degree of censorship is more obvious. And it's also in Mandarin.
I mean, people have been like, I've had people say to me, well, China has banned TikTok. We're going to ban it too. We're going to be just like the Chinese Communist Party. You guys are spared a lot of stress by not managing the social media accounts. But yes. So
I feel like you're just like slowly going crazy.
I am slowly going crazy. This wasn't bad. But yeah, TikTok totally, they have the CEO is Singaporean, so they always pull like, but TikTok, the owner is Singaporean. He's not Chinese.
I mean, it's not the owner. He's a CEO.
The
but
CEO,
but yeah, he's not Chinese. That's true.
Haha, so no connection at all.
Do we want to talk about the spying first or the censorship first?
There's so much.
Yeah.
It's also a little racist to say that the CEO could or couldn't be involved in spying because of his like ethnicity or country of origin.
There was one bad like congressional inquiry into TikTok where I forget who the senator was, but was like asking who asked the TikTok CEO point blank, "Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?" And his response was, "I'm Singaporean."
Yeah.
And like, I mean, that's perfect little propaganda right there.
Yeah, exactly. That does make that, first of all, that senator look bad.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, hey, we got censorship first on our little handy doc here, so let's start there. How about
Censorship.
I mean-
Actually, I don't want you to talk about censorship. I think we can't talk about that on this show.
mayonnaise to overreach?
Yeah, well, I think, there are people who think that TikTok doesn't censor,
Yeah.
but
Wait, I know how to set this up for the YouTube. We're going to tell you about all the horrible ways TikTok has been spying on you, but first, we'll talk about censorship, so stay tuned till the end. Like and subscribe.
we're really bad at being YouTubers, actually, aren't we?
Yes, we're held together by like Scotch tape and wishes and dreams.
Thank you nonetheless for watching.
Yes.
And Chris slowly going crazy over arguing with people on Instagram.
I'm only 23.
Well, okay, so censoring. Remember a few years ago when it came out that TikTok had these censorship lists, right, of words that were essentially censored in China that they also weren't,
Oh, I remember
yeah,
that.
yep. There was the issue of like Uyghurs saying that like stuff that they were posting about what was happening, that genocide was being censored. There's
Well, yeah, specifically, I remember there was this one channel, it started off as like a makeup tutorial, but
Yeah,
then
it
the
was
woman
just
started
like a-
talking about Uyghur genocide.
Yes, it was just one girl who decided she wanted to talk about this, but
And they shut down her whole channel. And then
Yeah.
there was a big outcry about like, wait a second, this doesn't make it seem like TikTok's an independent app. And then they reinstated the channel. But
yeah, that was just an oopsie. That was
Oopsie.
just
Yeah, they said it was just the individual human error.
Yeah, that was individual. Okay, so this was interesting. This is from an article from The Information that says it talks also about how in 2019, when the Hong Kong protests were going on, U.S. employees of TikTok were horrified to discover that content moderators on the global team who reported to TikTok managers in China were taking down videos of demonstrations.
So they were censoring Hong Kong protests.
Yeah, so they definitely censor. I don't know where this idea that TikTok censors less than U.S. media, like U.S. social media, comes from.
Yeah. There's that is a lie that is going around a lot. Like, oh, what did TikTok ever do to Americans? TikTok is the only place we can get information about Israel.
I mean, there has been a lot of kind of pro-Hamas type like stuff on TikTok.
Yes. Well, and that was interesting because this also shows a level of control. After the October 7th attack, TikTok was pushing a lot of pro-Hamas or pro-Palestine content. And, for many Americans, young Americans, this is the first they've ever really learned about it. But then we saw that, like, when it was APEC time, it dialed down on that when Xi Jinping was coming to San Francisco.
But like TikTok is totally independent company. It doesn't care about what the Chinese Communist Party wants.
This definitely shows that there are narratives that the Chinese Communist Party is able to push and dial back at their choosing.
Yeah. Wasn't there also that thing about how somehow the TikTok algorithm was promoting a lot of videos of like younger people talking about how America was terrible, and they were actually reading something that was written by
Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah. It was, I'm sure it was just.
Yeah. Why would the Chinese Communist Party try to create a social media app that influences a lot of young Americans? Who knows?
They also push CCP propaganda, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to defend COVID lockdowns in China, to do a bunch of apologize, like kind of saying that no, like nothing's wrong with what's happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs. Like the Uyghurs are just happy people who are dancing all the time.
Yeah.
There's no genocide here. That kind of stuff being pushed through TikTok. Yeah.
And there was the thing about the European ad library where they basically released, they have like the ads that go out, right?
Mhm.
And for the Europe market, there was like a bunch of essentially Chinese state created propaganda ads. Like, some of them were kind of benign, like cats playing on the Great Wall of China, but others were like, basically how great everything is in Xinjiang and all the happy Uyghurs and that kind of thing. So, like, there's definitely that's direct propaganda being pushed out through the app.
I mean, to be fair, you can get that kind of propaganda through YouTube as well and stuff. So.
I mean, I also sometimes when you watch China unscripted videos on YouTube, like it is possible to get an advertisement from state-run media in China just because we don't control what those pre-roll ads are.
But if you ever do get an ad from the state-run media in China on a China Uncensored or China Unscripted video, make a comment. We'd be amused to know about that. Yeah.
But, I mean, keep in mind the TikTok CEO has said that, I'm quoting, ByteDance engineers around the world may assist in developing TikTok algorithms. And those algorithms, this is now me talking, I'm not quoting anymore. But yeah, TikTok uses those algorithms to censor things the Communist Party doesn't want you to know. And like The Guardian did a story about that, how those things include content related to world leaders, Tiananmen Square, Tibetan independence, Falun Gong, as well as, quote, highly controversial topics.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think also people who haven't done computer programming might not quite get what an algorithm does. But like, if you give the Communist Party control of an algorithm, here's a very simple explanation of a very simple algorithm. If A happens, then it will do B, right? So you could apply this to TikTok. Like, if Tiananmen massacre is mentioned, then that video will not be shown to other users, right? So, and that's probably not, they're probably way more complex than that, but that's essentially one way in which algorithms can work. There's other types of algorithms that choose which videos to show you next, and they're complex. And a lot of these things, AI gets involved and starts making them more and more complex. But at the core, whatever you start programming the algorithms with gives an enormous amount of influence and control over what users see.
Well, let's even simplify it. Like, if you can't understand an algorithm, former U.S. employees of TikTok said moderators based in Beijing have the final call of whether flagged videos were approved. U.S. employees of TikTok said Beijing-based moderators were making final calls on these videos.
But, hey, TikTok is an American company. It's not controlled by the CCP. So we talk about spying?
Well, one more thing. This was discovered by leaked audio recordings of like TikTok meetings. BuzzFeed did a thing about this, but they had something called TikTok and ByteDance conducted an investigation called Project Raven. Well, this is a great way to talk about it.
Yeah, because the Raven is perched above your chamber door.
Oh, Matt, these jokes, just never more.
Okay, yeah. Good one, Chris.
Thank you. So yeah, Project Raven was about investigating journalists who were reporting negatively about ByteDance and TikTok. And the goal was to hunt down employees in TikTok who had been giving like this information to these journalists.
So yeah, they were literally using TikTok. So they were finding these journalists, like users in TikTok, and then using things like location tracking.
Yes.
To try to figure out if they were ever in the same place as a ByteDance or a TikTok employee. So literally spying on and stalking journalists to see who their secret sources were.
Yes.
Yeah. So the BuzzFeed journalists, Financial Times journalists, Forbes journalists, all of whom had reported on TikTok and ByteDance previously were tracked by
American journalists
or
being
British
tracked.
journalists, or
the same thing.
Yeah, but I think what's interesting also is that the reason these journalists had been targeted is because they had previously reported on TikTok. Like BuzzFeed had reported that TikTok had claimed that they were going to move all of their data to like U.S. servers right after the whole thing about where the Trump administration was going to force them to divest, and they agreed to do a sale with Oracle, and then they backed out of it. But they said, oh, we're still going to hire Oracle and move all of our data onto Oracle servers. Then BuzzFeed found out that, in fact, that, even though they moved the data, quote unquote, the parent company employees, ByteDance employees in China could still access the data.
Yep.
So that was like the first big scandal. And then when that stuff came out, then ByteDance and TikTok were like, we need to investigate and see who leaked this information to the press. Quick,
Because
spy on the
that's the
journalists.
problem.
This is why if TikTok divested or was separated out from ByteDance, it would be good for the company because then you won't have to deal with all of this.
Yeah.
And you could have confidence in it. But so keep in mind, like, people inside of communist China are looking at your data. So let me just read. When you sign up for TikTok and you agree to their terms of services, here's just a little list. I'm going to read it to you. A little tiny bit of the list of what you give them access to. So user data TikTok collects, device of the user, IP address, mobile carrier, time zone settings, model of the user's device system, network types, device IDs, screen resolution, operating system, app and file names and types, keystroke patterns, or rhythm. I've got good rhythm. Battery state, audio settings, connected audio devices, face prints and voice prints, media metadata, name, date of birth, phone number, email.
And obviously they were able to use some of that information to literally track people.
Yes.
We know that they can do it because they did it.
Yes. Yeah. Especially like the keystroke things and your face prints.
Yeah,
and voice prints.
they can only record keystrokes that are made through the TikTok app. So if you install TikTok, but then you're using, let's say, a Chrome browser outside of TikTok, then it won't record that. But it will record it if you click on a link and then it pops up inside.
Right. But nonetheless, they can still track a lot of other things. Like if you just have the app installed, TikTok can track your location at all times if you're carrying your phone with you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and we spoke to somebody who said that, like, once they get into your phone, say, it doesn't matter if you delete the app, they still have access.
Yes. Who did we interview that said that?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so it's a little bit scary. TikTok does have a tremendous amount of control.
I do want to talk about one more spying thing, which is that a former employee at ByteDance claimed that the ByteDance had used data held by the company, like that members of the Communist Party within ByteDance had used the data from TikTok to spy on Hong Kong protesters back in 2019.
Yep.
And that essentially, according to this employee, ByteDance has a super user credential, also known as a God credential, that enables a special committee of Chinese Communist Party members stationed at the company to view all data collected by ByteDance, including that of U.S. users. So this is what we were talking before about, control of ByteDance by the CCP and how all companies over a certain number of employees have to have Communist Party branches inside the companies. And sometimes it seems like, well, what are those communist branches actually doing? And sometimes they're just doing like ideological education stuff that no one wants to go to. Like everyone has to go do a class on Marxism, Leninism with Chinese characteristics. But they can also do stuff like this.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I mean, TikTok kind of tried to, or ByteDance tried to claim that this is just a disgruntled employee. I mean, to be fair, he could have been a disgruntled employee because this was part of a wrongful termination lawsuit. But he was willing to file this in a U.S. court, which there are repercussions for
making stuff up.
Yes. So I feel like that kind of mitigates the idea that this is just some disgruntled employee who's making stuff up.
Yeah.
So ByteDance is also involved as a humongous technology company in China. It's involved in a lot of like AI research that benefits the PLA, essentially. And it works with a lot of other Chinese technology companies that are doing things like creating supercomputers and things like that. But those companies also do things like contribute to China's nuclear program. You know, so it's just like there's the line between civil and military is purposely blurred
Yeah.
under the CCP. So, you know, that's another reason that ByteDance is directly answerable and controlled by the CCP.
I mean, you'd almost think U.S. sanctions should apply to companies that are working with the Chinese military. But the thing is, go ahead.
No, I mean, a lot of the companies that ByteDance works with, there are sanctions on them. Like they are blacklisted by the U.S.
Right.
Yeah.
But ByteDance, working with them, it's okay for ByteDance.
I think technically they haven't proven that ByteDance itself has done direct military things.
Because
Right.
there's this whole process, legal
Yes.
process that exists in the U.S.
Well, like, so they keep adding companies to the foreign entity list, right? So like, they could be investigating ByteDance right now, and we just don't, you know.
That's true too,
Yeah.
but it's also sounded like the government just doesn't, it's not able to do anything at once, anytime.
That's true. Yes.
So, I mean, I think big picture now, we've established clearly that the Chinese Communist Party controls TikTok. TikTok is not just like Facebook or any other U.S. social media. It is a nightmare, what it is. The idea that TikTok is not a threat is wrong. The idea like that this bill is like some kind of government overreach, that is not true.
The idea that TikTok is a champion for free speech is insane.
It's absurd.
Yeah.
It's absurd. And, you know, I do my best to be polite and calm with people I talk to online, except the ones who think, like, this is a Jewish conspiracy and I'm funded by the Jews. I also get mad when, like, people are like, what happened to you, Chris? You've become, like, a bootlicker for authoritarianism. And it's like, how can you have followed what we've done on this show for so many years?
Obviously, we're just propaganda.
Obviously. If you could show me a part in the bill, that's my open challenge. Just if you could make an argument. No one has made an argument to me yet. It's just vague, like, oh, the government's evil. Yes, it is. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Oh yeah, we have to talk about that.
Oh well, yeah. So this is where we're going. Let's talk about some defenders of TikTok and great opponents to this bill, because the bill it's not done yet. It has to go to Senate and be approved in the Senate. But
yes, and then it has to be signed into law by Biden. But he has already said he will sign it. And apparently, the Biden administration had been consulting with the House committee writing the bill.
Right.
So the Biden administration seems to actually be supporting this.
Yeah,
So.
and also just before this actually takes effect, recognize that even once Biden signs the bill, assuming it passes the Senate, there's still going to be this period where TikTok is supposed to be sold off, and TikTok could do all sorts of legal motions to try to stop it and delay it and whatever, right?
Because the U.S., this is what people honestly don't understand. The U.S. is not like communist China, where the government decides something and then makes up laws as an excuse for whatever they're going to do. The U.S. still has a system of checks and balances. And if you have the idea that the government can use this bill to just like do whatever it wants, then they don't need a bill in the first place. They could just do whatever they want, but they can't. Because that's not how the U.S. works.
Right. So again, it could be challenged in courts, just the way that Trump's executive order was challenged in the courts. And in that case, delayed long enough that eventually a new administration came in and reversed it. But in this case, you know, who knows what's going to happen, right? So it's still a very uphill battle. And I can imagine that the consequence for the Chinese Communist Party of losing control over TikTok is so big that they'll probably stop at nothing to fight this tooth and nail to the very end. And so that's why I think that a lot of the things we're seeing that are, you know, supporting TikTok or people advocating for TikTok, that is part of what the CCP wants, and in many respects is actively doing to just do anything it can to stop this TikTok bill.
And actively pushing the narratives of like, you know, this is free speech issue, it's government overreach, all that.
I think it's actually amazing. TikTok seems to have been caught off guard that this bill was even like made in committee. Like it seemed like last week they were suddenly like freaking out because they didn't know. I mean, they employ lots of lobbyists. They spend millions of dollars a year on lobbying Congress. So the fact that this happened and they were seemingly caught unawares is, it's kind of like a L for them.
Yeah, I mean, they're probably pretty confident that, what is it, 170 million Americans using it? That's enough protection, like especially in an election year.
Yeah, I think that is one thing that they are also arguing, that, it's an election year, like this would be, taking information away from the public,
Yeah. If you don't get your information from the Chinese Communist Party, gosh, you could make the right decision.
I mean, I think the Chinese Communist Party cares about public elections.
Well, God, that's the other thing I'm saying. Oh, yeah, the U.S. government really cares about people's privacy and freedom. It's like, shut up.
Well, I mean, I think the Communist Party does care about public elections, Matt. They really want to influence them. Look at what happened in Canada.
Oh, that's true. Well, that's the whole thing what Sam Cooper told us about the, paying people to or forcing them to vote.
Yeah,
on certain things.
Check out that episode, Sam Cooper. But yes, let's go to Senate, where there is some very vocal and unusual bedfellows in supporting TikTok.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the House, both AOC and Marjorie Taylor Greene were on the same side. They were both against the TikTok bill, which is it's very, yes.
They held hands as they walked down to the Congress floor to vote.
No,
they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I expected that Rand Paul would probably be against this bill because of this whole like ideological libertarianism, where it's like, oh, just don't actually be a functional government.
The best foreign policy is to just literally have no foreign policy, and then I guess
which would let the Chinese Communist Party take over.
Yeah,
it's very much suffers from that end of history.
Well, so I don't agree with Rand Paul's view on that particular thing, but also, I mean, so what's going on with Rand Paul? Like, why is he so opposed to this TikTok bill?
Well, I mean, I think he seems very confused about TikTok. He kept tweeting about how he was tweeting about China has banned TikTok.
Yes.
So if the U.S. bans TikTok, we will be just like communist China.
So that's not true. That's just, he doesn't understand it at all.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think there is this component that we're going to talk about with like Jeff Yass, right? Like the Republican mega donor, and how he has a 7% stake in ByteDance.
Yeah. So like the issue, like, so what disappointed me with the whole Rand Paul thing is like, not just like he's flat out wrong on TikTok, or that we have like ideological differences in like U.S. foreign policy. Because I mean, I believe people can disagree on things, and that doesn't mean they have to be your enemy and no longer be your friend. But what was disappointing is to find out about Jeff Yass, big old Republican donor.
Yeah, well, he's a billionaire who has, a 7% stake. That's personal 7%, plus one of his companies has more. So a stake worth billions in ByteDance.
Not in TikTok. So that might make a difference. Like if you had a stake in TikTok and TikTok got divested, then
you probably want to sell it.
You would make a lot of money.
Yeah, big old Republican donor. A lot of the people he donates to, including Rand Paul, very against the TikTok bill.
I mean, he donates to Club for Growth, which is a big conservative.
It's like an advocacy group.
Yes.
Oh yeah, and he donates to Massey too, Thomas Massey, because somebody was like, I really believe what Thomas Massey said, and like I like this guy who messaged me, but he's like, yeah, here's a clip of Thomas Massey saying the problems, and Massey's arguments did not have an argument. It was just kind of vague, like, TikTok's not a threat. The U.S. government overreach is bad. He's also getting lots of money.
Yeah, although Massey is also, like Rand Paul, ideologically opposed to the U.S. being involved in anything foreign, essentially. He became famous in Hong Kong for voting against every single Hong Kong bill that came through the U.S. Congress, because he just doesn't want the U.S. to be involved in anything.
Yeah. So I won't go so far as to say like, oh, that's because he's bought off by the CCP. I think that's just the political ideology that I disagree with.
But I think that, if he can't make a good argument for it, like if his argument is things like the bill's too long, that seems suspect to me.
Yeah.
Right. And, just because Rand Paul's 2020 election campaign super PACs, which are technically not controlled by him, even though they received $10.2 million in donations from Jeff Yass, who has a major stake in ByteDance, does not mean that's why Rand Paul opposes the TikTok bill. It's just like it could actually be a coincidence, or it could be direct influence, and we don't know.
We don't know, but I do think that it is a little disappointing to see how far that influence does go in terms of like political donors, in terms of, it's not just Jeff Yass, like how many people in Wall Street like have investments in China, and thus we're trying to convince, the Trump administration not to put tariffs on China.
Yes.
Like, it's just like there's a lot of conflicting interests, and having them exposed is only good for the American public, because then you can kind of see like, the more of the picture of what's could be going on in the background.
Right. And the Chinese, Communist Party is trying to influence people from all sides of the spectrum. It's not just necessarily Republicans or Democrats. Although in this case, so ByteDance had given $150,000 contribution to the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. That's like the Hispanic members of the House and the Senate. And AOC is one of the Hispanic Caucus members. So her group did receive ByteDance money directly. And AOC also voted no on the TikTok bill. But again, that could be a coincidence.
Yep. ByteDance also gave a bunch of money to the Black Caucus too.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's very hard. And, obviously it's illegal to take bribes, and we're not accusing anyone of taking bribes, but there are legal ways to accept money, right? And this is how lobbyists work too, right? Like TikTok lobbyists go directly and meet with these Congress people. They can't give them money. They can't wine and dine them, but they can do things like throw fundraisers that raise money for super PACs that support that congressperson's campaign, right? And then that's essentially a way of monetarily incentivizing people that is within U.S. law. And lobbyists go right to the edge of what's legal all the time, and not just from TikTok, but from all sorts of corporations. And so, yeah, like we're not talking about anything illegal here, but there's probably, if ByteDance is directly or indirectly giving money that supports your political career, like you might be a little sympathetic to that.
I mean, without even the bribery part, right? Like the idea that like if somebody's giving you a lot of money, like that could just make you predisposed to like consider their opinions a little bit more.
That's right. Leave a super chat below and I'll consider your opinion.
Yeah, like a $5 donation may make you, consider a bit more. That yeah. It is true though that I think that's just like a human impulse that you want to keep people happy.
Yeah, well, I think what the problem is that, especially a lot of like these older Americans, some people in government, or just anyone who doesn't understand the TikTok as a threat. They don't understand that war has changed, that this is an era of information warfare. And that's not just like a fancy term. Like this is actually war we are in with the Chinese Communist Party. And TikTok is a major weapon the party is using against us.
Yeah, so we can see a lot of, now that TikTok is under threat, a lot of these like political warfare tactics being used by both TikTok to defend itself and by the Chinese Communist Party on behalf of TikTok, right? Like the whole idea that freedom of speech is threatened if TikTok gets banned, which again, the bill's not about banning TikTok specifically. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry just released a report called Freedom of Speech in the United States, Truth and Facts. Ooh. Which is full of both truth and facts. But of course, there's a section on TikTok in it where they essentially criticize the U.S. Government. Like the whole point of this report is to try to undermine the idea that the U.S. cares about freedom of speech, right? It's trying to use essentially like U.S. like values against it. You know what I mean? It's as like a political warfare tactic to try to make the U.S. seem like a hypocrite. So, how can you say you're for freedom of speech when you're trying to, investigate TikTok.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what was also funny is like right after that is a section about how social media limits freedom of speech, where he talks about not TikTok, but Twitter and Facebook, and they can censor speech, and that's bad.
Yeah. I mean, which is also why, China bans all American social media.
Yeah. That is funny if you would think about the idea that the U.S. Forcing the CCP to divest TikTok is bad. Look at what China's doing. Like, would they ever let American social media in, especially one that was like partially owned by the U.S. government?
Yeah.
It's just like if you flip that around, it just seems like, yes, okay, if we're talking about it this way, we understand why TikTok is not like any other social media. And I think we talked a little bit about how divestment actually protects freedom of speech from the CCP.
Because again, TikTok censors Americans.
But I think like a lot of people, like you, Chris, have noticed how suddenly there seems to be like a huge contingent of people arguing against the TikTok bill on social media and talking a lot about like this U.S. government overreach, like fears of U.S. government overreach. And a lot of people have been questioning, where is this coming from? Like it seems to like all of a sudden like this is spreading all over social media. And we don't have any evidence right now that the CCP is behind this, but I think that they are definitely fanning the flames of this in terms of like if you kind of fan the flames of this type of paranoia about the US government for people who are on the right who are already distrustful of big government or of like the US government feeling like maybe like conservative media or social media is censored, et cetera, it almost creates the same effect ultimately as it is when the CCP fans these ideas on the left about how the U.S. is bad because it's, U.S. hegemony, it's a colonial power, like all these things about trying to make people believe ultimately that the U.S. is a terrible country. They're just coming at it from two different sides. So for the left believing that like, okay, U.S. hegemony is bad, therefore U.S. getting involved in the world is bad, the U.S. trying to counter countries like China or Iran or Russia, that's bad. The U.S. shouldn't be involved because it's a hegemonic power, And then on the other side, you can see now like the argument that they will use this argument to target people on the right. The idea that like, oh, the U.S. government is bad because
you should be more afraid of the U.S. government than China.
Like you don't want the U.S. government to get too much power, and this bill that would force like China to divest TikTok is actually U.S. government overreach. It's restricting free speech. What you actually want is for the U.S. government to be weaker and weaker because it's such a bad government. And then from the CCP standpoint, what this means is that the weaker the U.S. is, the like less they'll be able to counter the CCP, and the more free reign the CCP will have to do what it wants to throughout the world.
Bingo.
So the whole idea is that like it cripples the U.S. against the CCP. I mean, if you take this argument that like you can't give the U.S. any kind of power because it'll abuse it, then you have a non-functioning government, essentially. Right.
But I mean, some country, some government is going to fill a global leadership vacuum. I wonder who wants to fill that vacuum.
Well, I mean, as long as it's not the U.S.,
Yeah, and I think what's clever about the way that they're trying to influence people on the left and the right is that some of the fundamental things they say are based on truths, right? Like it is true that there has been U.S. government overreach politically. It is true that the U.S. Has done things overseas that are pretty darn shady, and the difference is that like that. Just because those things are true or have happened, the follow-up to that, like you can't say, therefore you should allow TikTok, right? Like ultimately that's total nonsense. But like you can point out the problems that the U.S. has had. And that doesn't mean that the TikTok bill is bad.
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, Matt, that essentially what the CCP is doing in this kind of political warfare is taking things that, like, it's
Are truth and facts.
like, have an understandable impulse, right? Like, you're like, okay, maybe colonialism is bad, or maybe, government overreach is bad. And then taking, like, the reaction to that and, like, twisting it to their own means. Like, this happened during COVID, right? Where understandably people were like, oh, it's probably not good to have like old Asian ladies attacked in the subway. But then the CCP will write an article where it's like, that is exactly the same thing as criticizing China's COVID policies.
Yeah.
So just taking something that like people would be like, oh yeah, that's reasonable, understandable, and then like twisting the logic to meet their own ends. And then a lot of people don't see that how they're doing it,
Yeah, and that's why I keep telling people, just look at the bill. What in the bill is a problem?
I also find it interesting that people who are against the TikTok bill don't have an answer for what do you do about TikTok.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not just an answer for like why the bill is bad specifically, except for like general, the U.S. government overreach is bad. But yeah, what are we supposed to do about TikTok? Like, do you just want to let TikTok become a information warfare weapon wielded by the CCP? Like, are you just saying that like that's fine, you're okay with it, or do you have like another idea? Like, like explain. Like, we should have this debate, right? Like, what are the other things that could be done to stop the CCP from influencing 170 million Americans?
Yeah, I mean, there are alternatives, and I could think of one, which is what the Indian government did. They banned TikTok.
Well, yeah, but that, like, if people are freaking out about this, they're not going to allow a bill that would actually just ban something, because they think that's what this is, basically. So that's not a solution.
No, I'm not suggesting that as the alternative. I'm just saying, like, what else can you do? You can tell them to move their servers, but as we've established,
they did, and
they did, and it didn't stop the Chinese Communist Party control.
I mean, fundamentally, we can see that ByteDance is a dishonest company. Again, not saying that like all other companies are great and honest or whatever, but that ByteDance has proven over and over again that it's going to do shady things and then lie about it. So, we can't necessarily be like, oh, right, you said you double pinky promise this time that you won't access U.S. user data, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Unrelated, but that shirt looks like something somebody would wear on Babylon 5.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I think this is why I'm very happy that like we had a chance to make this podcast, and I hope that you watching, like, if you had questions about this TikTok bill and what's going on, it hopefully clarifies some things for you. If you know people who are saying some of the things we've talked about, that like TikTok is not a threat or this is government overreach, that you are now feel better educated to kind of respond to those criticisms, you can send them this episode. Because yeah, this is information warfare, and it's very serious. And if you just like look at the bill,
yeah. And I want to make one other point, which is, and this is a general point, which is the CCP does not like this TikTok bill, and in general, if the Chinese Communist Party opposes some specific action that the U.S. is doing, then even if that action isn't perfect, it's probably on the right track.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, look at how much they're freaking out over this. It's definitely something they're afraid of.
So, yeah, I would say we've looked closely at this bill. We've been following China for a long time. We support this bill. I hope that means something to you.
I do think that it's kind of ironic in a way that in response to a bill about TikTok, which makes 30 to 60-second videos, we have produced an over hour-long podcast to try to rebut these claims in detail, which I'm sure lots of people who watch lots of TikTok will watch.
Yes, right. All right. Well, all right. If this was 126 minutes, we can make 126 shorts. Anderson, divide this into 126 episodes. Shorts. Oh, this will be great. We're blowing up here. We're blowing up here, people.
If by blowing up you mean imploding.
We're like Captain Holt on Brooklyn Nine-Nine tweeting for the first time. We understand the social media. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for watching, and thank you for joining us in this information warfare. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelly Chong.
And I'm Matt Gnesta.
Talk to you next time, hopefully on our new TikTok account, because it's owned by me.
You'll buy TikTok?
I'll give you $1.